Hello and welcome to another episode in the texture series. We stay in the theoretical part. And so let's have a word about smooth, uneven and coarse. What do I have in mind with that now? And that's of course pretty simple, but it needs to be discussed because I believe that some people just start out with photography and 3D maybe, and then we have to discuss this. And I know everything that I say here might be already known, and I can't know that, of course, what you know already, so I have to be complete here. And smooth means when I take a look from the top view to a wall, for example, when we have a wall that is just like that. It's very smooth here. We have, of course, some little dents and stuff like that. Then we have something that is maybe a little bit uneven. And that is, of course, a different quality and needs a different handling. And then we have something like a wall that has maybe a lot of different things going on. And what I want to explain or discover today here is when we use which technology to get this into Cinema 4D, because to create textures is just the idea to pull the reality into Cinema 4D. We have discussed the smooth way, of course, and I'll show you an example for that. This would be my example for a smooth surface. Now you can say when we take here just a little tiny area and we create the life of an ant, then this is not smooth anymore, right? The scale makes, of course, the whole thing to something smooth, or even not. When this is in the background and far away from the camera, this has no need for anything in terms of bump map, displacement, or so on. And I get maybe even away with the light here inside. And just to give you that hint, we have specular highlights here on the edges. Maybe not really specular already, but we have highlights here. And we have shadows in everything, and of course dirt. But the main idea here is, of course, the surface quality is relatively gray and gray marble-like surface, very low saturated, and we have a very low contrast in it when we take the shadow and the light information so far out. When we would have a very diffuse light here, we would have problems really to see this structure here. This can be done with a bump map. And if we go closer to it, maybe with a displacement map even, this doesn't need to be modeled at all. And this would be here my example to explain smooth surfaces. Next one is a little bit more rough, and of course we want to have all of these information inside of our scene, so we can have the illusion that we have a wall inside. Again, when we have a plate like this, from this perspective, if this would be the Cinema 4D scene, here we see that black little bump. Then we see how little that can be. And also here the pavement is smooth from my point of view. Of course, the real smoothness would be here my Macbeth chart. And even there we could argue from an ant's view, this would be already very rough. Okay, so why I talk about this? The idea is here that we have discussed a wall like this with bump map, with normal maps and with displacement map. And when we go far away, we get here around the edges of the stone everything in a fairly good way. Of course, if we go really to the side of this wall, we would have problems to sell this as a good wall. But with the bump map and with the displacement map, maybe we get away with a lot of stuff. This would be here the medium thing, where I think we touch here nearly the border of a texture, where we have finally to say, should we model this or should we go into camera mapping? And that would be then the next part. Another example where I would think we have reached the idea where we can just take an image and just use it. Because this is of course a tree and it goes one time around and it has some problems. The more we come to the border of this tree here from this view, the more the surface here is compressed. And this is of course not nice. We could take here just a little bit out and maybe get away with it. And we discuss, of course, this kind of problem, but we have here, at least in the lower part, a more or less cylindrical object, and we need an unwrapping of this surface here. The structure by itself is not that high. When we have maybe an view from the final camera in this way, then we can create a texture, go one time around, and maybe with a bump, perhaps with a displacement, we get away with it. This would be here already something that is very close to the border where I think a texture is enough, and of course we could use here camera projection already, which would give us a lot of information from the start. And this is the point where I go now over the border, and I will show you another example. And this here is now my example where I think we can't really get a texture out of this. And you might say, yeah, but we can use this for camera mapping, and that is exactly the point. That is for me the border that I want to draw here when we talk about textures. Camera projection is of course a sophisticated way to texture an object, and I agree with this to 100%. But what I want to do here is of course to create textures that we can apply to many objects and which work, of course. This one here wouldn't work on any object when we move the camera too far around. And I will explain this. First of all, we have here to each of these, let's call it wall, a side view, except for the front part where the Macbeth chart here is. This is relatively flat and is maybe not on the border where I would say we can't use it. This area here, this would be usable as texture. Of course, the Macbeth chart has to go on then. And then we have here two areas where we have problems, and I will discuss this, of course. First of all, we have a different light situation here. Even diffuse, this looks a little bit brighter than this area. We could correct this. And we need always a little bit light, as shown in the first image, to give more information. And when it is diffuse, we can get away with it, but sometimes we want to have sun and shadows in it. And then we have to take a look into displacement map, as discussed already in this series. More importantly, let's have a look to this stone here. This side view, or the view to this side here, is of course an information that we don't have from this side here. We don't have it, it's just not there. And if we go ahead and we take this four-sided frame and we create a rectangle out of it, then we would get maybe something that would work when we have an object and we look always from the side to it. That's maybe possible, but that's already something very close to camera projection, even that simple. In the moment we move the camera around, we have that problem here, that we have no information, and we have even objects that stand out, that's why I call it cores, which obscure here these areas from this stone. And that looks horrible. And I want to show you that, of course, I have set this up here in Cinema 4D as a very fast, rough camera projection. And of course I have created one camera move where I think that's possible without big bruises, and I have created a camera move not far off from the other one where I think that doesn't work at all, and you will see immediately what I have in mind with that. So this is the scene at all. I had a cube here which I have subdivided, and then I have pulled here a little bit to get something like a geometry here back to the stones. Of course, I think the invested time was maybe 20 minutes or so just for sculpting it. And this is not very precise, it's just for the demo here. And what I have done here is, of course, I want to show you here, that is the first camera. I'll show you that later on again. And then I switch off this camera. I want to show you the scene here, how it looks like. Camera mapping is a complete different animal than any other projection method, because we take here a point of view to it and we re-distort or undistort the perspective distortion that we had in the picture to get final information. And you can see here already that is not very nice here, especially when we go here very far to the end, to the left side. And please compare the camera projection series that I have created. I go more into detail into that, but for the sake of completion and to create a definition inside of this series, I thought we need to talk about this. So when I go closer to this, and I go here to displays and to Guru shading, then you can see here I have done some damage to this mesh, and you can see it has some shapes in it. It's not very detailed, just enough to create something that works fairly good and something that works not at all. So let's try the camera fail here for a moment, and this would be here now this camera move, and you can see here it doesn't work at all. So I go here back to Guru shading, and this would be here something that looks stretched and it doesn't work at all. And now we have here very large stones and then very tiny one, very compressed, and even here the perspective gives away that this Macbeth chart here is now glued to a flat area. Not very nice. And I have done this here with a variation, and I'll show you that as well. So we go now here, and we can see we get some parallax in it, some new parallax in it. And I have rendered this, of course, and I want to show you this here, just like this. It's done with the physical camera, so we have some motion blur in it, some depth of field, I have some distortion in it, some vignetting, and I think we see already that we get more information out than just a flat texture. That is why I discussed this, because I believe firmly in the differentiation between different areas, and the more you know from the neighbors of one main subject, the more you know exactly the definition of the theme that we discuss here, and that is just texture. And that sums it up already, because I wanted only to give you here an inside view where I would draw the border, and that's pretty much all. Thanks for listening. Have fun with it. Bye bye.